Hello, Exiles. The middle of June, and Necropolis is officially a 4-month league. All the same, while I haven't been making videos, I have been tearing up SSF on more than 20 new characters? Yeah, if not 20, a little over. Testing various build frameworks, skill interactions, and unique items. Why SSF? Because I like making league starters. I don't do enough aspirational content to make high-end builds. I think that's at least been inferred by anyone who's following the channel, at least as far as Path of Exile is concerned. I like the challenge of finding a build that costs very little, performs well, and farms its own gear to kill pinnacles and get void stones, and you know, that's plenty for me. That's enough of a challenge. I did kill an Uber this league just to kind of say I did, right? Entirely self-concocted build. Shared it with a bunch of people, they had fun. And besides all that, the challenge of finding a build that costs little, performs well, and farms its own gear to get its own void stones is like, that's kind of where I have fun with the game. You know, I don't need to be doing aspirational content all the time. There's a lot of aspirational content I enjoy doing, even at the like actual aspirational level, but it's never really the focus for me. That does bring the league into question though, and in fairness, it colors my opinion quite a bit. Playing in solo self found's another ball game compared to trade. Necropolis is basically a trash fire, and my sentiments are probably echoed elsewhere on this one. I've tried to avoid other people's league reviews because I want to just, you know, be unfiltered and, you know, genuine in that way. And it's been somewhat useful in the sense that never before has an environment been so hostile for testing a new build in. The problem is that when the game becomes this demanding, builds that struggle in one part start to struggle in every place. This was something that came up a lot when I did kind of my Glacial Hammer series, where I was like, let's just throw a Glacial Hammer on a two-hander and kill the pinnacles and see what that takes. And what I found was that it took actually a lot. Like, a lot more than I would have expected, just because you kind of don't understand how as you get further, you're going to need more and more. If I had to do that challenge now, I would not be a happy person. That would be miserable. I'd still get it done. I would just die like 20 times as much because of the way the game is in Necropolis. The way this all shakes out is if you don't have enough damage, you now need even more damage just to have subpar damage. And now you don't have enough defense, like on top of it. Low survivability but great damage, now your damage is mediocre just so your survivability can still suck. And this is like, it's very important specifically in the early mapping experience because a build almost always gets by on one attribute being exemplary for that stage of the game. Very, very few builds can be well-rounded at that point, and even less can be well-rounded at the start of the mapping and scale well into reds. Just as an aside, I did find a few builds that did manage to do this. Dominating Blow Necromancer finally happened, and it was very enjoyable to full Chaos Convert and abuse a high minion count for tons of Wither Stacks. Any Archmage build seems to do this well also, because it blows up the screen with ease and has tons of raw HP through Mind Over Matter. My personal take on that Archmage thing was like a Shock Nova for clear and Lightning Conduit for single target on an Elementalist. Speaking of Elementalist, I didn't really give it the time it deserved, but Golem Elementalist has probably one of the strongest defensive layers I've ever seen through Stone Golem of Safeguarding. That being a ridiculous 67% of melee damage taken from the Golem's life before my own, and that was without any special investment. I stood in all the slams on an Elementalist, which I've never been able to do before. Guardian Dominating Blow was a flop because scaling the damage felt super awkward and just never got going. And most melee builds simply couldn't put out enough damage while meeting their inherently higher defensive need. Which, that's not a surprise. We know what the state of melee is in Path of Exile right now. It's basically the state of Necropolis. They're like this, and if you put them together, you stack Underflow and have a good time in like super difficult gameplay way, I guess. Maybe. I didn't. That's a lie. It's actually just awful. That said, in a twist M. Night Shyamalan couldn't come up with, it was actually a Chainhook Berserker that I had like real success on, specifically using Rage Vortex of Berserking alongside it. It's my most recent build and I've taken it to level 80, but the prospects are good enough, especially for melee, where I was like, oh, yes, this is good. Big fan. Other honorable mentions are an Impending Doom Archmage and a Charge Dash Assassin, all of which I'm mentioning because if these sound exciting, it'll help me in the future to know where my time should be spent making guides. You know? Those last two are elbow deep in the experimental territory, though, and I have no idea where they're going long term, so fun though. So, how is Necropolis related to all of this? That's rather simple and can be deduced by looking at any map you throw into your irrevocably altered nightmare device. 20% of non-chaos damage is extra chaos damage. 50% increased damage, 40% increased attack and cast speed, 80% chance to gain an endurance charge on hit. These modifiers look like they were designed for T17 maps. Before someone said, fuck it, let's make the modifiers that brick entire maps for those and throw these into the league instead. For reference, a normal damage mod on a map is like 20 to 30%. That kind of tracks either whether it's like the actual flat damage mod or the like extra fizz damages fire mod. Usually around that range. I'd say the chaos one is significantly more dangerous because of the wither. This basically means that one type of monster in your map could have what's equivalent to an extra 2 damage mods, and it's completely out of your control, right? I mean, you can obviously move stuff around and choose who gets it, but someone's getting it. I guess unless you have frogs for everything always, which wouldn't that be fun? Honestly though, this isn't that bad. Like, not until you factor in the situation that makes it extremely problematic. And honestly just outright mystifying as to why it's still in the game at all. You can legitimately run into a rare monster in a T5 map that will be more difficult than anything you encounter in something T14 plus. And no, this isn't solved by the rewards just need to be better, because it's a goddamn T5 map, dude. Triple res boots with 30% move speed is a major reward at that stage of the game. That enemy will take time to kill and chase you relentlessly, or worse, outright kill you. This is a major problem here specifically because it's when your primary source of growth is still leveling up, and if your time is being eaten up by these little frivolous things that really don't do anything for you, it's exponentially bad, like as far as you playing the game. And if you've played the game a long time and you're used to certain things, it can become discouraging, right? It can make a build feel worse than it is and make you think maybe I should reroll, right? I need to go find something that's going to be more fun to play, because it's just how it is. And that's Melee in a nutshell for pretty much the whole game. And then even other builds in Necropolis seem to be falling into this trap where if it's not meta, you're not having a good time. Or kind of at like this, the current climate of the game requires players to farm incredible amounts of resources to make really good gear. Or at least kill enough enemies to just like get something good to drop. But more and more though, it feels like grinding gear games is designing things earlier and earlier as if you already have the gear. Like, I will make a new character, have a 6-link ready to go for them, and it'll be like, what would I be doing if I didn't have this 6-link? It's insanity. I don't think I'm going too far with my assessment that Alcan Go on a T16 shouldn't be harder than, say, a synthesized map or like a basic breach boss. One of these things you do constantly at a baseline, the others you have to earn your way toward, and yet in the current game, Alcan going on T16s is like way harder than those other things. My major point here is that it already feels like the game's balance is skewed inappropriately in this regard, and Necropolis has like pushed that to an extreme. And the reason why it's so extreme is because we can't opt out of it, you know? I'm sure that's been the number one complaint from everyone. I hope it's the number one complaint from everyone. Because in that sense, Necropolis is like the biggest disaster since Arch Nemesis integration, right? And the league's numbers kind of show it. Even in Trade League, where you have access to resources early that are generally way outside your normal range of acquisition and a solo self-found, this league is oppressive, right? No one who finally gets comfortable wants to start a new character, get to maps, and realize they have to go through all of that again, right? That early mapping experience where you're trying to get the build to red tier map viability and just feeling good. It's like running through the campaign is more enjoyable than that because it takes a lot of time, but at least when I run through the campaign, it never gets that bad. The mapping experience up to end tier maps, because the game is played in three. This is a massive tangent that wasn't planned. The game is kind of played in 3 stages. You start your character, you get to maps, first stage. You get to maps, you get to end tier maps. That's the second stage, right? And that stage is kind of important because obviously it needs to be harder than the campaign experience, but it shouldn't be harder than the end game experience, right? You like when you get to your farming reds, that should be the foot of the mountain moment where you're kind of like, all right, I have my basic void stones. Now I have to kill Maven and Uber Elder, and I have to do a whole bunch of other stuff on the side if I want to, and I need to farm these things and get these crazy pieces of gear. And you do all this and you do all that, and you you make it to T17s or Ubers or Wave 30 Simulacrums or crazy deep delves, you know? And it's like, that stage of the game, I almost feel like getting there, or rather starting there, is easier than getting there, right? If once you get there, you're at a much more comfortable place, because once you can do T14s, 15s, 16 maps regularly, you're farming, right? You are making progress. Until a build gets to that point, you are adrift at sea. And it's one of those situations where it's like, do you need an Uber boss drop to make your build viable and get there? And that's a really bad situation, I won't lie. It's like, if that's what it takes, then maybe that drop shouldn't be on an Uber boss, or maybe that drop should be nerfed and some of the power should be baked into the game baseline, because that's a big problem, right? This is where I'm coming from. This is like who I am. This is how I play the game. These are the problems I see, and they're pretty substantial, and they're getting worse, right? There's too much stuff being piled onto the player to make progression slower, and like not enough being given back to make getting to, I guess I would say, like the point where farming is supposed to begin more smooth. And some of you might disagree with me, but quite frankly, if you've played Solo Cellphone, you know, until you get to those higher tier maps, you are gated out of a lot of stuff. Or I should say, you are gated out of a lot of stuff that will give you the real power on your character. Okay, tangent over. I would be remiss, though, not to talk about T17s, of which I probably have a more controversial opinion, maybe. That is to say, I actually really like them and where they're at. I found that since the tuning, they're really not harder than the Uber bosses they give you access to, but they can be, which, honestly, that's fine for how rewarding they are. Especially, the reward potential is probably too high, and maybe that's just because of how Back to Basics works. Right, that seems to be the outlier, and I'm sure Back to Basics is probably going to get nerfed somewhat, and then everything might be fine, right? Especially if they nerf both the reward side and the difficulty side of it. The other thing, though, is the maps are so damn big, they could make them smaller. I'm sure that's not the easiest way to do it, because I'm not sure how to, like, tweak a generation algorithm, but they're really big. That's going to scale the rewards proportionally, right? It's like more pack size, but except more packs. It's an entirely separate multiplier. All right. The real issue I think that I have with T17s, and I think most other people will, is that you're locking your 5th map device behind it, and that's a bad idea. It absolutely is a bad idea, and I think GGG should probably like allow T17s to be a way to unlock it, but like have it unlocked by other stuff, right? This is a big boost to your ability to farm and like juice content in the game, and you need to be able to work with that. I mean, 5-way legions, they could have left it on there. A Cheula Breach Zone, a Cortex, or Wave 20 Simulacrum, maybe even delving deeply enough, I don't know. Killing a high enough level at Siri in the temple. It's lots of things that are, I probably mixed in some things that were a lot easier than others there, but there's lots of things in the game that appropriately challenge a player and kind of give them that sense of satisfaction where this reward is appropriate. And putting it behind a T17 is pretty rough because, again, not all builds hit their power at the right moment, right? You need something else that could come from behind the content you get access to in that regard, if that makes sense. Basically, if you have to do stuff past T17s to make your character stronger at a reasonable pace, but you can't do T17s, you're screwed. I don't like that. I assume other people in that situation don't like it either. Hi, Editing Winkers here. I just wanted to come in and state, I'm aware some builds are like this, and they're gonna be like this. You know, certain archetypes are going to require significantly more investment, and then they have a proportional payoff, and you're going to need high-end gear for it, and you want to leave reasons for those high-end drops to, like, give you a reason to play a new character. I'm saying all of this right now specifically because, well, the game is really demanding it for, like, way too many archetypes. You know, I almost feel like all of Melee, maybe even Slams and a few other builds, have items locked to Ubers that are just too impactful for the build to survive and thrive at a point before you get that piece of gear. Okay, that's T17s though. What about Necropolis despite the flaws, right? Let's forget about the UI issues and the absurd tuning for a moment. All flames are good, right? Yeah, all flames are great. And if there's one thing to carry forward in this game from this league, it's the ability to add special, harder mobs to your map that have interesting loot. I actually think that could go core, just on its own, right? If you could find all flames, and then you, like, use it in your map device, somehow. I wouldn't know. They'd have to probably like add an all flame slot where you put it in there and then all of a sudden you have the lantern going, or you have like a lantern UI, I don't know, some sort of UI element, you put an all flame in it that drops randomly, and then suddenly you're doing all flames, right? And you can get your Toda tattoos. I mean, that alone, right? I think that alone would be like, people heard that was going core, they'd get very excited. Next, graveyard crafting. Is it good? No. No, I don't think it is. It's powerful, but it's an abomination, and I'll throw fists over it. It's with enough corpses, you can more or less print an item guaranteeing several key mobs, potentially even with like a specific fracture. That's terrible for the health of the game, though. And more than that, I think it's a huge part of why GGG keeps the game in such an overtuned state this league. Like, they're expecting us to have that stuff. But that goes back to the point of, why is the game harder now for something that I'm going to get later? That doesn't make a lot of sense to me personally. Perhaps more noteworthy as to like why the player count is dropping off, because I mean, Harvest could have been accused of this as well, but Harvest had great numbers. The reward doesn't really feel tangible, right? Collecting corpses isn't a rewarding experience, and upside modifiers in the Lantern kind of front load your reward expectations. Like, let me explain what that means. It means you experience the excitement of what you're getting before you enter the map, not when you get it. This is kind of important because if you see the big divine mod, there's a serious chance it whiffs and you get like a lower result than average. Compare that to hitting a jackpot on a rare mob and you realize that it feels better to have a big drop happen without the expectation, because stuff. Yeah, no, that's where I'm gonna go. It's just instant unforeseen. It will always be better than kind of set up with that expectation. Like that whole thing about getting the big drop suddenly, the big exciting moment of killing an enemy and the loot showing up, that's what the genre is all about. I've got my hands up, I'm Italian. That's what the genre is all about. I mean, it's the big drop, sudden and unexpected. Even the boss loot is kind of structured in a way that makes you feel suspense for like that one extremely impactful moment. And everything about Necropolis goes against this, which is why the feeling doesn't seem to be there. And actually the exception here would actually be the All Flames, where like, you know, the drop could be there. So the entire map where you're fighting those mobs, and like, I guess with totem mobs, right, you get the one unique mob. That's exciting. It's like, all right, there's some stuff I can get from this that's really good. Higher chance of it showing up. It doesn't show up most of the time, but you're still getting stuff that's rewarding. And when it does show up, it's a huge moment. You know, that's how it goes. That's the ARPG. Everything about Necropolis goes against this, which is why the feeling doesn't seem to be there. And that's what makes it, for me, one of GGG's biggest misses ever. And even one of their biggest misses ever is still a better game than most of the other games I play. So that's kind of like grain of salt. But I mean, you stockpile corpses, but finding them isn't exciting, and done optimally, it almost seems like a foregone conclusion of what you'll get. The rewards from the Lantern show how ineffective advertising your luck in advance is, and they overlap too much with Searing Eater altars anyway. The only thing I could compare it to is Onslaught League. I went back and I was like, there was another league like this. I had to look it up because I think it was kind of before my time. But Onslaught League, I believe, was a hardcore only league back when they were split. And all your enemies had Onslaught, and that was it. There were 20% attack, cast, and movement speed. You know, that's how Necropolis is, right? You get these extra rewards, but when you're actually playing it, it just feels more difficult when you're playing. And the reward systems are completely divorced from the actual gameplay, except for the All Flames. Honestly, if they had made the whole league All Flames and removed all the downsides, upsides from the Lantern, it probably would have been extremely well received. Maybe someone at GGG will see this and be like, hey, that could be a cool 1 month. I would play the hell out of that. Kidding me? Or All Flames, all Flames, and then like the game isn't super difficult? Not likely, but I don't want to play Standard, and I can't ignore Necropolis. Until July, I guess. Have a good one, Exiles.